Welcome to the Hearths of Myths. Let the noise of the modern world fade away. Let the electric hum of the lights dim, and let the constant, frantic rhythm of the day slow down until it matches the beating of a much older, much slower heart. Tonight, we do not look up at the stars with hope. Tonight, we look down. We look past the roots of the trees, past the bedrock of the mountains, and into the deep, dark places where the things that frighten the gods themselves are born. We are going to speak of a creature so vast that the human mind struggles to comprehend its scale. We are going to speak of the boundary of the world. We are going to speak of the great serpent, Jörmungandr. But a story of such magnitude cannot begin with the monster full grown. It cannot begin with the ocean boiling and the sky turning black. Like all tragedies, and like all catastrophes, it begins quietly. It begins in the shadows. It begins with a mother, and a forest that has never known the warmth of the sun. To find the origin of the world serpent, we must travel far to the east of Midgard. We must leave behind the lands of men, where the fields are tilled and the fires are kept in stone hearths. We must cross the great rivers that slice through the earth like open veins. We must enter Jotunheim, the land of the giants, and even there we must go deeper, into a place that even the frost giants avoid. We must enter Jörmungandr, the iron wood. Close your eyes and visualize a forest that is not made of wood and leaf, but of malice and endurance. The trees here are ancient, but they are not majestic. They are twisted, gnarled things, their bark as hard and gray as cold iron. They do not bend in the wind, they creak. A sound like the grinding of rusted hinges echoes through the mist that perpetually clings to the ground. The leaves are dark, almost black, and they are sharp. If you were to brush against them, they would slice your skin like a razor. There is no birdsong here. The only creatures that dwell in the iron wood are the wolves, the great, starving wolves, and the troll wives who breed them. This is a place of primal stagnation. It is a pocket of reality where the chaotic forces that existed before the ordering of the cosmos still linger, festering, waiting for a chance to reclaim the light. It is here, in a hall woven from the living roots of iron trees and the bones of ancient beasts, that she lives, Angrboda. Her name is a warning. In the Old Norse tongue it translates to the one who offers sorrow, or the grief-bringer. She is not a goddess of the Aesir, radiant and vain. She is a Jotun. She is of the race that remembers the time before Odin, before the laws of physics were written by the gods. She is a witch of the old ways, a satyr worker who spins magic not from light, but from the shadows of the soul. She is vast, powerful, and undeniably dangerous. She is the mother of nightmares, and she is waiting. The myth tells us that the god Loki came to her. Loki, the sky treader, the trickster, the blood brother of Odin. Why did he come to this desolate, terrifying place? The primary texts do not speak of a romance in the human sense. There were no courtships, no poetry recited under the moon. This was a convergence of elemental forces. Loki is the fire, wild, unpredictable, consuming, and transformative. Angrboda is the iron, cold, unyielding, ancient, and enduring. When fire meets iron, something is forged. When the chaotic intellect of Loki met the primal, fertile power of the grief-bringer, the result was inevitable. It was not a union of love, but a union of destiny. It was an alchemical reaction that the universe had been holding its breath for. From this union, 3 children were born in the heart of the iron wood, and they were not like any children ever seen in the 9 realms. The first was Fenrir, the great wolf. He was born with a hunger that could swallow the sun, a beast of rage and raw power who would one day break the chains of the gods. The second was Hel, a girl, or half a girl. Divided down the middle, one side of her was the flesh of a living maiden, beautiful and pale. The other side was the blue-black, rotting flesh of a corpse. She was the living embodiment of the grave, the queen of the quiet dead. These 2 were terrifying enough. They represented the hunger of nature and the inevitability of death. But it is the 3rd child that concerns us tonight. The 3rd child was something else entirely. Imagine the moment of his birth. The iron wood falls silent. The wind stops its mournful howling through the metal leaves. In the darkness of Angrboda's hall, something wet and slick slides into the world. It does not cry out like a wolf. It does not wail like a child. It makes no sound at all. It is a long, sinuous shape, coiled upon itself like a heap of wet rope. It has no legs to walk the earth. It has no wings to fly the sky. It has only the coil. It is a serpent. But even in these first moments, as the amniotic fluids of the giantess steam in the cold air, there is something wrong about the scale of the creature. It is small, perhaps the size of a man's arm, but its eyes, yellow, vertical slit pupils, set in a head of scaling green and black, hold a depth that suggests an abyss. This is Jörmungandr. The name itself rumbles in the throat. He is the 3rd sorrow. If Fenrir is the destruction of the physical body, and Hel is the decay of the spirit, then Jörmungandr is the destruction of the world order itself. He is the boundary breaker. He is the chaotic water that seeks to drown the solid land. In those early days, hidden away in the gloom of Jotunheim, the serpent began to grow, and the rate of his growth was the first sign of the horror to come. A normal snake grows slowly, shedding its skin season by season. Jörmungandr grew by the hour. One day he was the size of a whip. The next, he was the thickness of a tree trunk. He slithered through the undergrowth of the iron wood, his scales scraping against the iron bark trees, leaving deep grooves in the metal-hard wood. He did not eat milk or meat like a normal offspring. He seemed to consume the very space around him, absorbing the dark magic of the forest, swelling with a toxic vitality. Angrboda, the mother of monsters, watched her brood with a fierce, protective pride. She knew what they were. She knew that in her hall she was raising the instruments of Ragnarok. She knew that the wolf would bite the moon, the girl would inherit the hell, and the snake would encircle the reality. She kept them hidden. She wove spells of concealment around her part of the woods, mists of confusion to turn away the eyes of the curious. But the eyes of Asgard are not so easily blinded. High above the world, in the golden realm of the gods, there sits a throne, Hlidskjalf. It is the high seat of Odin, the All-Father. From this vantage point, Odin can see into all 9 worlds. He can see the secret deeds of men in Midgard, the toiling of dwarves in Svartalfheim, and the movements of giants in Jotunheim. Odin is the god of wisdom, but wisdom comes with a terrible price: paranoia. He is obsessed with the fate of the gods. He knows the prophecies. He has sacrificed his own eye to drink from the well of knowledge. He has hung himself from the world tree to learn the runes. He knows that his reign is not eternal. He knows that a shadow is coming. For nights, Odin had been plagued by dreams. Not the confused, fleeing dreams of mortals, but the prophetic, crushing visions of a god. He dreamt of jaws that swallowed the light. He dreamt of a silence that rotted the soul. And he dreamt of a wave, a dark, oily wave that rose higher than the mountains and washed away the history of the Aesir. He woke from these dreams sweating, the taste of sea salt and blood in his mouth. He looked to the east. He looked toward the iron wood. The prophecies of the Volva, the seeress, had whispered of this time. 3 children, born of the trickster and the witch. The Norns, the weavers of fate, who sit at the base of Yggdrasil, began to spin new threads. These were not the white threads of happiness or the red threads of war. These were black threads, thick, coarse, and heavy. They wove them into the tapestry of the cosmos, and the weight of them pulled the fabric of reality taut. The presence of Jörmungandr and his siblings was tipping the balance of the worlds. The gods could feel it. The air in Asgard grew heavy. The golden apples of Idun seemed to lose a fraction of their luster. There was a static charge in the atmosphere, a feeling of pressure building before a storm. Odin called a council. He did not speak of his fears openly, for a king must not show terror, but he commanded that the children be found. He sent the gods, Tyr the brave, Thor the strong, and others, to cross the rivers and breach the iron wood. The journey was perilous. The iron wood fights against intruders. The path moves. The trees seem to reach out to block the way. The mist creates phantoms to lead travelers astray into the jaws of the waiting wolves. But the gods are the masters of order. They cut through the illusions. They marched into the heart of the darkness. They found Angrboda's hall. The meeting was tense, a standoff between the divine order of Asgard and the chaotic liberty of the giants. Angrboda stood before her children, a tower of rage. But even she could not fight the combined might of the Aesir. The gods looked upon the offspring. They saw the wolf, who was already larger than any normal beast, his eyes burning with an intelligent fury. They saw the girl, half corpse, standing silent and terrifying, and they saw the serpent. At this stage, Jörmungandr was still small enough to be moved, though small is relative when speaking of cosmic horrors. He was perhaps the length of a longship's mast. He lay coiled in the corner of the hall, a pile of shimmering, wet scales. He did not hiss at the gods. He did not strike. He simply watched them. His eyes were the color of stagnant water. They were cold, indifferent, and ancient. When Thor looked at the serpent, he felt a strange sensation in his arm, a twitch in the muscle, a premonition of the pain that would one day shatter him. The serpent looked back, and in that gaze the animosity was born. It was an instinctual hatred, like the repulsion between opposite magnetic poles. The storm and the sea. The hammer and the fang. They recognized each other as enemies before a single blow was struck. The gods took the children. They bound the wolf, though he thought it a game. They took the girl, and they took the serpent. They carried them out of the iron wood, away from the protective mists of the mother, and brought them to Asgard. They brought the seeds of their own destruction into the heart of their sanctuary. It is one of the great ironies of Norse mythology. In trying to prevent the prophecy, the gods ensured it. If they had left the children in the woods, perhaps they would have remained local terrors. But by bringing them to the center of the world, they gave them a global stage. The journey back to Asgard was difficult. The serpent was heavy, not just physically heavy, but metaphysically dense. He carried the weight of the earth element, the crushing gravity of the deep. Carrying him felt like carrying a piece of a mountain. He was sluggish, cold to the touch, his skin covered in a mucus that burned the hands of the lesser gods. He did not struggle. He was waiting. It is a defining trait of Jörmungandr, patience. He is the lurker. He waits for the moment when the prey is vulnerable. When they finally arrived at the great gates of Asgard, the Valgrind, the other gods gathered to see the captives. They gasped at the sight of the wolf and the corpse girl, but the serpent unsettled them in a different way. There is something fundamentally wrong about a snake of that size. It triggers a primal fear in the primate brain, a fear encoded in our DNA from the time when we were small mammals hiding in the trees. It is the fear of the predator that can slide into the burrow, the predator that has no limbs to break, no neck to snap easily. It is pure muscle and venom. Odin sat on his high seat and pronounced judgment. He dealt with the siblings one by one. For Hel, he saw that she did not belong in the light. Her half-dead visage terrified the living. So he cast her down, deep into the roots of the world, to Niflheim. He gave her dominion over the 9 worlds of the dead, to rule over those who died of sickness and old age. It was a grim gift, but it gave her a purpose. For Fenrir, the gods decided to keep him close, to raise him, hoping to tame him, a mistake that would cost Tyr his hand. But for the serpent, Odin looked at Jörmungandr. He looked into those pale, vertical eyes, and he saw no humanity, no bargain to be made, no territory that could contain him on land. A beast that grew this fast would soon devour all the game in the forests of the gods. If he was locked in a cage, he would crush the bars. If he was tied, he would slip the knots. There was only one place vast enough to hold him, only one place where his crushing weight would be supported, and where his venom would be diluted by infinite salt. The ocean. The decision was made instantly. There was no trial, there was no discussion. Odin, with the strength of the All-Father, grabbed the serpent. The text of the prose Edda is brief here, but the implication is violent. He did not gently release the creature. He cast him. He threw him. Imagine the scene. The highest point in the universe, the gleaming walls of Asgard, floating above the clouds. And from the parapet, a massive, writhing green shape is hurled into the void. Jörmungandr fell. He fell past the clouds, past the soaring eagles, past the mountain peaks of Midgard, where the snow never melts. He fell for days, a streak of emerald and black against the gray sky. The wind rushed past his scales, whistling and screaming. As he fell, he saw the world spread out below him. He saw the continents of men, small and fragile islands of green and brown. He saw the vast forests, and surrounding it all, he saw the gray, heaving, endless expanse of the outer ocean. To a creature of the earth and wood, The ocean should have been death. But Jörmungandr was not a normal creature. He was a survivor. As he plummeted toward the crushing surface of the water, he did not feel fear. He felt a strange, cold affinity. The ocean was like him, deep, dark, cold, and merciless. It was a place of silence, a place of pressure. He hit the water with a force that shook the tectonic plates. The impact created tsunamis that washed over the uninhabited coasts of the north. He sank, down, down, through the layers of the sea. The light of the sun faded from white to blue, to indigo, and finally to absolute black. The pressure built, squeezing him, compressing his scales, hardening them from the texture of snakeskin to the hardness of diamond. He reached the bottom, the ooze of the seabed, the silent, dark plains of the abyss. Here, among the hydrothermal vents and the blind, pale fish, Jörmungandr found his true home. The iron wood had been a nursery. The ocean was his kingdom. And he began to grow, freed from the constraints of gravity and the boundaries of the forest. His growth accelerated into something monstrous. He ate everything. He ate the whales that dove too deep. He ate the kraken that warred in the trenches. He ate the very currents of the sea. His body lengthened, stretching out mile after mile. He grew so long that he could wrap himself around an underwater mountain range and crush it into dust just to scratch an itch. The years passed, centuries, millennia. The serpent grew until he was no longer just a monster in the ocean. He became a geographic feature. His body became the continental shelf. His movements became the tides. When he slept, the seas were calm. When he turned in his sleep, storms ravaged the coasts of Midgard. Sailors began to whisper of the great worm. They knew that there were places in the sea where the water was too deep, where the waves moved wrong. They knew that the boundary of the world was not a cliff, but a living thing. He grew until he achieved the impossible. He grew until his head, circumnavigating the globe in the crushing dark, bumped into something familiar, something scaly, something pulsating with the same dark blood. He had found his own tail. He opened his massive jaws, jaws that could swallow a city, and he bit down. He did not bite to eat. He bit to hold on. He bit to close the circle. The moment his teeth sank into the scales of his tail, a circuit was completed. The Ouroboros, the world encircler. The serpent had become the belt of the world, holding the oceans together, binding the chaotic waters in place. The tension of his body held the earth firm. But in that darkness, holding his own tail, Jörmungandr dreamed. He did not dream of the iron wood anymore. He dreamed of the golden light he had seen for a fleeting moment before he was thrown. He dreamed of the face of the one-eyed god who had cast him down, and he dreamed of the red-bearded one who smelled of thunder. The hatred did not cool in the deep water. It crystallized. It became a cold, hard thing, waiting for the day when the tail would be released and the ocean would rise to claim the sky. The shadow that began in the iron wood now encircled the world. The monster was no longer coming. He was here. He was everywhere. Every time a wave crashed on the shore, it was the breath of Jörmungandr. And the gods in Asgard, feasting in their halls, could only look down at the gray water and wonder when the surface would break. This is the origin. This is the shadow. But the story of the serpent is not just one of lying in the dark. It is a story of confrontation. And the first time the serpent and the thunder god would meet, it would not be on a battlefield, but in a contest of illusions. A game where the stakes were hidden, and the lifting of a single paw would threaten to unmake the cosmos. But to understand that, we must leave the bottom of the ocean and travel to the court of a giant king who mastered the art of deceit. We must prepare for the journey to Utgard. The silence of the iron wood was broken not by the howling of wolves, but by the heavy, rhythmic tread of divine boots. The Aesir had crossed the rivers Elivagar, the streams of freezing venom that flowed from the dawn of time, and they had breached the perimeter of the giantess's domain. They moved with the grim determination of executioners, yet also with the caution of thieves. For they were not here to wage a war against the Jotun nation. They were here for a kidnapping. They were here to prune the branches of a family tree that threatened to overshadow the world ash itself. Imagine the contrast. On one side you have the gods of Asgard, Tyr with his hand still whole, radiating a stoic bravery, Thor gripping the handle of Mjolnir, his knuckles white, his eyes scanning the shadows for movement, and perhaps others, silent sentinels of the order. They are beings of sunlight, of gold, of defined laws and clear boundaries. On the other side, the children of Angrboda. They are beings of the twilight, of shapeless potential, of biological riot. When the gods entered the hall of the witch, the air tasted of copper and wet fur. The darkness seemed to recoil from the light of the Aesir, huddled in the corners like a wounded animal. They found the three siblings waiting. It is said in the lore that Angrboda did not fight them. Perhaps she knew that resistance was futile against the combined might of the High Council. Or perhaps, with the terrifying foresight of a seeress, she knew that this abduction was necessary. She knew that her children could not become what they were meant to be if they stayed in the nursery of the woods. They needed the world. They needed the pain of exile to forge their hatred. So she stood back, a towering shadow in the gloom, and let the gods take them. The binding of the wolf was a struggle of strength, a chaotic wrestling match of fur and muscle that foreshadowed the great chains to come. The taking of the girl was a moment of revulsion, the gods hesitating to touch the half-rotted flesh of the future Queen of Hell. But the taking of the serpent, that was a moment of profound, unsettling quiet. Jörmungandr lay coiled on the earthen floor. He was larger now than at his birth, a thick cable of muscle and scale. When Thor stepped forward to seize him, the thunder god paused. The air around the serpent felt heavy, dense, as if the gravity in that specific spot had increased. Thor reached down. His hands, accustomed to the rough handle of the hammer and the splintering wood of giant skulls, closed around the serpent's body. It was cold. Not the cold of snow, which burns, but the cold of deep stone, the cold of the void between stars. It was a sapping cold that seemed to try and drink the warmth right out of the god's blood. And the texture, it was slick, coated in a primordial slime that made it difficult to grip. Thor grunted, hoisting the creature onto his shoulders. The serpent did not strike. He did not hiss. He simply shifted his weight, his coils moving with a slow, hypnotic fluidity, wrapping loosely around the god's torso. It was an embrace that was not affectionate, but possessive, as if the serpent was measuring the god, as if he was memorizing the rhythm of Thor's heartbeat so that he could one day stop it. The return journey was a somber procession. They left the iron wood, the metal leaves clattering behind them like applause, and made the long trek back to the bridge. Bifrost, the burning rainbow, the bridge that connects the world of men and giants to the realm of the gods. To walk on Bifrost is to walk on fire. It is a structure of woven light and magic, fragile yet indestructible to all but the enemies of Asgard. When the gods stepped onto it, carrying their burdens, the bridge hummed. It vibrated with a dissonance. It did not like these passengers. It recognized the wolf, the snake, and the death girl as foreign contaminants. The light of the rainbow seemed to dim around them, turning gray and sickly. They climbed the arc of the sky. Below them, Midgard spread out like a green tapestry, unaware of the monsters passing overhead. They reached the top, the Himinbjörg, the cliffs of heaven, and passed through the great gates into the golden plains of Asgard/Gladsheim. The beauty of Asgard is legendary. Roofs thatched with golden shields, spears used as pillars, benches covered in ringmail. It is a place of eternal noon, where the shadows are sharp and the air is clear. But as the procession entered the Hall of Judgment, a pall fell over the assembly. Odin waited for them, the High One, the Lord of the Gallows. He sat on his throne, flanked by his wolves, Geri and Freki, and his ravens, Hugin and Munin. His single eye, blazing with the blue light of cosmic wisdom, fixed upon the captives. He did not look at them with hatred. He looked at them with recognition. He had seen them in the well of Mimir. He had seen them in the smoke of the sacrificial fires. He knew their names. He knew their destinies. And he knew that he could not kill them. This is a crucial point often missed in the retelling. Why did Odin not simply draw his spear, Gungnir, and slay the monsters there and then? Why risk the apocalypse? The answer lies in the ancient laws of the sanctuary. Asgard is a Gridastadr, a place of peace and truce. No blood can be spilled within its holy bounds, not even the blood of enemies. To kill these children in the hall of the gods would be to defile the sanctuary, to break the luck of the Aesir, and to invite doom upon themselves. The gods were trapped by their own rules of civilization. They could not act as butchers. They had to act as judges. And so the sentencing began. Odin dealt with the others first. He looked at Hel, the girl of half flesh and half rot. He saw that she was not a creature of war, but a creature of administration. She needed a kingdom where the sun did not shine. "Go," he commanded, his voice echoing like thunder in a canyon. "I cast you down to Niflheim. I give you authority over 9 worlds. You shall host those who die of sickness and old age. You shall have a hall and a plate and a knife. You shall be a queen." And so Hel was banished, not to death, but to power in the dark. Next, the wolf. Fenrir looked at Odin with intelligent amber eyes. He wagged his tail, a mockery of a puppy. The gods, perhaps out of a lingering hope or a desire to keep the enemy close where they could watch him, decided to foster him. They would keep him in Asgard. They would feed him. They would try to civilize the hunger. It was the decision of a parent who cannot admit that their child is a sociopath. It was a decision born of hubris. Then, finally, Odin turned his gaze to the serpent. Thor stepped forward and dropped the coiled mass onto the floor of the hall. Jörmungandr raised his head. He was growing by the minute. The atmosphere of Asgard, rich with magic, seemed to feed him just as the iron wood had. His scales were hardening, turning from a dull green to a shimmering iridescent emerald and black. He flicked his tongue, a forked ribbon of darkness, tasting the air. He tasted the gold. He tasted the mead. He tasted the fear. Odin stood up from his throne. He walked down the steps, his cloak of blue drifting behind him. He approached the serpent. The other gods stepped back, giving the All-Father space. Odin leaned on his spear and looked into the eyes of the beast. It was a meeting of two different kinds of infinity. Odin represented the infinite height of the sky, the air, the intellect, the breath. Jörmungandr represented the infinite depth of the ocean, the water, the instinct, the blood. Odin felt the prophecy rising in his throat like bile. He knew that this creature was the specific doom of Thor. He looked at his son, the strongest of the gods, standing proud and oblivious with his hammer. Odin knew that if he let this snake stay in Asgard, or even in Midgard on the land, the confrontation would happen too soon. The snake needed to be removed. It needed to be put somewhere where it could not hurt men, where it could not poison the air, where it was out of sight and out of mind. "The land cannot hold you," Odin whispered, his voice low and raspy. "Your weight would crush the mountains. Your venom would sour the soil. You are a creature of the void. You belong to the abyss." Odin did not ask for volunteers. He did not ask Thor to carry the snake to the edge. This was a deed for the king. He bent down, his hands, old and weathered, covered in the runes of power, grasped the serpent. He lifted Jörmungandr. The snake was heavy, incredibly heavy, but Odin was the shaper of worlds. He had lifted the sky from the earth at the dawn of time. He could lift a snake. He walked out of the hall. He walked past the silent assembly of the Aesir, past the Valkyries, past the Einherjar. He walked to the edge of the fortifications of Asgard. He stood on the parapet, looking down. Miles below, through the wisps of clouds, lay the world. He saw the central continent of Midgard, the home of humanity, surrounded by the vast, encircling ocean, the Uthaf, the outer sea, the water that marked the end of reality. Jörmungandr did not struggle. In the arms of the All-Father, he felt a strange sense of destiny. He sensed where he was going. He could smell the salt air rising from miles below. He felt the pull of the tides in his blood. Odin held him out over the void. "Grow," the god said, a curse and a blessing intertwined. "Grow in the deep, where no eye can see you. Circle the world. Hold it together. But know this, monster. If you ever release your tail, if you ever rise to break the surface, I will be waiting. We will all be waiting." And then Odin opened his hands. The fall was not like falling off a cliff. It was a skydive from the stratosphere. Jörmungandr plummeted. The wind roared in his ears, a deafening scream of atmospheric friction. He fell past the branches of Yggdrasil, the world tree, seeing the great stag grazing on the leaves, seeing the squirrel Ratatosk running messages of spite. He fell past the realm of the light elves, Alfheim, catching a glimpse of their crystal towers. He fell through the clouds of Midgard, turning and twisting in the air, a living meteor. The heat of entry burned his skin, but he did not burn up. He was too cold, too elemental. He pierced the lower atmosphere and saw the ocean rushing up to meet him. It looked like a sheet of hammered gray metal. It looked hard. The impact was cataclysmic. When Jörmungandr hit the surface of the sea, the sound was heard in every corner of the world. It was a crack like the breaking of the sky. Water was displaced in a massive ring, sending waves taller than cathedrals racing toward the shores of Jotunheim and Midgard. The ocean opened up like a wound to swallow him, and he sank. The chaos of the fall, the noise of the wind, the burning of the air, all of it vanished in an instant. It was replaced by the crushing, enveloping embrace of the water. The silence was absolute. The cold was comforting. Jörmungandr drifted down, surrounded by a curtain of bubbles, bleeding the heat of his fall into the freezing water. He watched the light of the sun, that hated, burning eye, recede. It grew smaller and smaller until it was just a pale star, and then nothing. Darkness. He had arrived. This was not a prison. Odin, in his wisdom, had made a terrible mistake. He thought he was banishing the monster to a dungeon. Instead, he had released the apex predator into the perfect hunting ground. The ocean was vast. It was full of life to consume, and it was unprotected. There were no gods here, no hammers, no spears, only the old, blind things of the deep. Jörmungandr uncoiled. He stretched. For the first time in his life, he fully stretched out his body. He felt the water pressing against his scales, thousands of tons of pressure, and it felt like a hug. He tasted the salt. He tasted the minerals. He flicked his tongue and tasted the blood of a whale miles away. He began to swim, a sinuous S-shaped motion that propelled him through the dark with terrifying speed. He was hungry. The journey had been long, and the growth that was demanding to happen required fuel. He opened his jaws and swallowed a school of sharks without slowing down. This was the beginning of the great encirclement. The serpent was no longer a guest in the halls of the gods. He was the king of the deep. And as he swam, he began to think. His thoughts were slow, cold, and drifting like the currents. He thought of the hand that had thrown him. He thought of the face of the thunderer. He locked those images away in the reptilian center of his brain. He had time. The ocean is timeless. He would eat. He would grow. He would circle. And he would wait for the fishing boat. But before the fishing boat, there would be the growth. The transformation from a monster into a world feature. To understand the true horror of Jörmungandr, we must understand what happens to a biological organism when it becomes the size of a continent. We must dive deeper with him into the biology of the abyss and witness the moment the circle is closed. The shadow has fallen. The water has settled. But beneath the waves, the nightmare is expanding. The ocean is not merely a body of water. To the ancients, and to the truth of the myth, the ocean is a conscious entity. It is the womb of the world, and it is the grave. When Jörmungandr sank into the crushing darkness of the abyss, he did not enter a void. He entered a kingdom that had been waiting for a king. The sunlight was gone. The warmth of the surface was a distant memory. Here, in the midnight zone, the only light came from the ghostly bioluminescence of strange gelatinous creatures that drifted in the current like lost souls. The pressure was immense, enough to crush a submarine like a tin can, enough to turn wood into diamond. But for the serpent, this pressure was not a burden. It was a swaddling cloth. It held him together. It signaled to his chaotic Jotun biology that it was time to change. In the silence of the deep, a terrifying metamorphosis began. In the iron wood, he had been a snake of the forest, green, mottled, adapted for slithering over roots and rocks. But the ocean demanded something else. His scales, once smooth and reptilian, began to thicken. They grew heavy, jagged, and dark. They absorbed the minerals of the sea, the iron, the magnesium, the salt, and calcified into armor plating that was stronger than any shield forged in Asgard. They became like black basalt, rough and impenetrable. Barnacles, the size of shields, began to grow on his back. Seaweed and kelp anchored themselves in the crevices of his hide. He was becoming less of an animal and more of a landscape. His eyes, too, changed. The vertical slits of the viper widened. They lost the need to see in the spectrum of the sun. They became sensitive to the faintest glimmer of movement, to the thermal signatures of life in the freezing dark. They began to glow with a faint, sickly yellow light. 2 twin moons in the underwater night, the only warning a prey animal would ever see before the darkness swallowed them. And the hunger evolved. In the forest, he had eaten deer or wolves. Here, the scale of the prey matched the scale of the predator. Jörmungandr prowled the trenches. He hunted the ancient squids, the krakens that had ruled the deep since the dawn of time. These were battles of titans, fought in absolute silence. A kraken would wrap its tentacles around the serpent's throat, its beak snapping at the scales, but it was like a child wrestling a mountain. Jörmungandr would simply coil, a slow, inexorable contraction of muscle. The kraken would be crushed, its ink spilling uselessly into the black water, and then it would be consumed. With every meal, he grew. The magic of Angrboda and the chaotic potential of Loki fueled a growth spurt that defied the laws of physics. He grew not by inches, but by leagues. His body lengthened, stretching out through the underwater canyons, winding around the base of the continents. He was becoming the Midgard Serpent, the Midgard Serpent. But he was not yet the world encircler. He was still a line, not a circle. Time in the deep ocean is not measured in hours or days. It is measured in eras. Above the waves, the world of men was changing. The tribes of the north were learning to forge iron. They were building longships. They were lighting fires to Thor and Odin. Seasons cycled: winter, spring, summer, fall, white snow, green grass, red leaves. But down in the dark, there was only the eternal cold and the rhythmic pulse of the serpent's heart. Thump, thump, thump. A beat so slow and so powerful that it created the undercurrents that sailors would later fear. Jörmungandr began to move with a purpose. He felt an instinctual drive, a compulsion written into his blood by the Norns. He had to measure his prison. He had to know the boundaries of the cage Odin had thrown him into. So he swam. He swam east. He followed the continental shelf, keeping the land of Midgard to his left and the infinite void of the outer ocean to his right. He passed the roots of the mountains. He passed the submerged ruins of lands that had sunk beneath the waves long before humanity could name them. He swam past the frozen coast of Niflheim, where the water turned to slush and the icebergs scraped against his back like fingernails. He felt the chill of the dead realm, but he did not stop. He was alive, vibrantly, terrifyingly alive. He swam past the burning lands of the south, Muspelheim's borders, where underwater volcanoes spewed magma into the sea. The water boiled around him. The steam hissed against his scales. He enjoyed the heat. It reminded him of the fire of his father, Loki. He swam through the plumes of sulfur and ash, breathing it in, letting the toxicity fuel his venom sacs. His poison, the ether, was brewing. It was becoming a substance so potent that a single drop could rot the hull of a ship. A single breath could clear the sky of birds. Years turned into centuries. The serpent swam on. His body was now so long that it spanned time zones. When his head was in the twilight of the west, his tail was still in the dawn of the east. He was a living meridian. The sheer displacement of his mass raised the sea level. Coastal villages in Midgard were flooded, not by storms, but simply because the serpent had breathed in. Men looked at the rising tides and blamed the moon, not knowing that the true cause was sliding silently beneath their keels. And then the moment came. It was a moment that had been destined since the dawn of creation. Jörmungandr was swimming through the dark waters of the north, completing his circumnavigation. The water here was familiar. The taste of the salt was the same as it had been at the start of his journey. He peered through the gloom with his glowing eyes. Ahead of him, in the distance, he saw a shape. It was massive. It was covered in barnacles and ancient scars. It was dark, scaled, and radiated a familiar power. Jörmungandr slowed. Was this a rival? Was this another monster sent by Odin to challenge him? Had the All-Father bred a second guardian to patrol the deep? The serpent felt a flash of rage. This was his kingdom. He bared his fangs, fangs the size of monoliths, dripping with black venom. He prepared to strike. He prepared to tear this intruder apart. He lunged. The water exploded with his speed. He closed the distance in a heartbeat. He opened his jaws wide, ready to crush the enemy's spine. But as he bit down, as his teeth sank into the flesh of the stranger, a jolt of pain shot through his own body. It was a sharp, electric shock that traveled up his spine, straight to his brain. He froze. He released his bite slightly, confused. He looked closer. He recognized the pattern of the scales. He recognized the scar where a glacier had scraped him centuries ago. It was his own tail. He had done it. He had grown so large that he had wrapped around the entire world. The sphere of Midgard was encircled. He had encompassed the earth. The journey was over. There was nowhere left to go. For a moment, Jörmungandr drifted there, his jaws hovering over his own tail. He felt a profound sense of isolation. He was the biggest thing in existence, and because of that, he was the loneliest. He filled the world, yet he was outside of it. But then, a new instinct took over, a compulsion of stability. If he let go, he would just drift aimless forever. If he let go, the waters would remain chaotic, sloshing over the land without restraint. But if he held on, if he bit down and locked the circle, he would become the structure. He would become the boundary. Jörmungandr opened his mouth again, this time not in anger, but in acceptance. He took his tail into his mouth. He bit down, not to wound, but to latch. His fangs found the grooves between his own scales. They clicked into place like the tumblers of a cosmic lock. That sound was not heard by ears, but it was felt by the soul of the world. Deep in the earth, the tectonic plates settled. The wild, chaotic energies of the primordial era were suddenly hemmed in. The girdle of the world was fastened. Jörmungandr tightened his coils. He pulled. The continents were squeezed together. The oceans were held in their basins. The tension of the serpent's body became the tension that held reality together. This is the meaning of the Ouroboros. It is not just a symbol of eternity. It is a symbol of tension. The world exists inside the embrace of the monster. We are safe only because the monster has not yet decided to let go. With the circle closed, Jörmungandr settled. He sank into a state of semi-hibernation. He was not asleep, for a guardian can never truly sleep, but he became still. He became the world serpent. Sand and silt drifted over his body, burying him until he looked like a range of underwater mountains. Coral reefs grew on his flanks. Strange, deep-sea civilizations of fish and crabs built their homes in the shadow of his spines. But his mind remained active. In the dark, locked in his own embrace, he listened. He listened to the vibrations of the world above. He heard the keels of the Viking longships cutting the waves. He heard the prayers of the sailors. Thor, protect us. Thor, save us from the deep. Thor. The name vibrated through the water like an insult. The serpent remembered the red-haired god. He remembered the rough hands that had grabbed him in the iron wood. He remembered the arrogance of the Aesir. And now, hearing the humans call upon that name for protection against him, the anger simmered. The tension in his body was not just physical, it was emotional. He was a loaded spring. He was a bow drawn back to its breaking point. He was waiting for the trigger. And he knew, with the certainty of the tide, that the trigger would come. The Thunderer would not stay in the sky forever. He was a god of adventures, a god who sought out challenges. Eventually, the sky would feel too small for him, just as the land had felt too small for the serpent. The ocean became a place of fear for the men of Midgard. They did not know the specifics of the biology down there, but they felt the presence. They called the outer ocean the Mare Tenebrosum, the Sea of Darkness. They drew maps where the edges were marked with the warning, "Here there be dragons." They were right. The dragon was the edge. The horizon line was the curve of his spine. Imagine being a sailor in those days. You are in a wooden boat, fragile as an eggshell, sailing across the gray, heaving swells of the North Atlantic. The sky is low and heavy. The wind is biting. You look down into the water, and you see nothing but blackness. But then, for a second, you think you see something. A shape moving deep below. A flash of a scale the size of a farmhouse. A yellow light that blinks and vanishes. You feel the boat lurch, not from a wave, but from something shifting underneath you. The hair stands up on your arms. You realize that you are not sailing on water. You are sailing on the back of a god's mistake. This is the cosmic horror of Jörmungandr. He is the environment itself turning hostile. He is the reminder that the ordered world of humanity is just a thin skin floating on a bubble of chaos, and that bubble is being squeezed. As the ages passed, the legend of the Midgard Serpent grew. The giants in Jotunheim sang songs of him, songs of pride, waiting for their champion to rise. The gods in Asgard spoke of him in hushed tones, checking the wards, watching the sea levels. But Jörmungandr just lay there, holding his tail, breathing, waiting. But the waiting was about to end. The threads of fate were being pulled tight. The Norns were weaving a new pattern, one that would bring the sky and the sea into a collision course. It would start with a journey to the east, a journey undertaken by Thor, driven by his own ego and the trickery of the giants, a journey to a fortress of illusions. The serpent sensed it. He felt the vibrations of the chariot wheels leaving Asgard. He felt the thunder rolling toward the coast. He tightened his grip on his tail. His eyes opened in the dark, illuminating the abyss with a hateful yellow glare. "Come," the serpent thought, his mind projecting through the water like sonar. "Come, little god. Come and see how big the world has truly become." The stage is set. The circle is closed. The biological miracle of the deep is complete. Now, we must turn our eyes back to the surface, to the land of giants, and to a castle made of mist and lies. We must witness the moment when Thor unknowingly lays his hands on the serpent for the second time. We must go to the contest of the cat. The ocean is deep, but the rabbit hole of magic is deeper. We must now turn our gaze away from the crushing blackness of the abyss and look upwards, toward the surface, to a place that exists on the very edge of the map. We travel to the fortress of Utgard. This is not a place of stone and mortar, but a construct of shadow and will. It is the domain of Utgard Loki, the giant king of the Outyards, a master of illusions, who weaves reality as easily as a spider weaves silk. Here, the laws of physics are suggestions, and the perceptions of the mind are the battlefield. Thor had arrived at this fortress not as a conqueror, but as a traveler. He had been stripped of his arrogance layer by layer. He had been tricked in the forest by the giant Skrimir, who was merely a projection of the king. He had failed to untie a provision bag that was sealed with iron magic. And now, standing in the great hall of the giants, surrounded by faces that leered with quiet mockery, he was being tested. But these were not tests of skill. They were tests of the impossible. The atmosphere in the hall was stifling. It smelled of old magic, of ozone and dust. The torches flickered with a cold, blue flame that gave no warmth. Thor stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving, his face flushed with a mixture of exertion and shame. He had just engaged in a drinking contest. He had been given a long horn and told to drain it. He had drunk with the thirst of a desert, gulping down rivers of mead, yet the level in the horn had barely dropped. He did not know, he could not know, that the tip of the horn had been magically connected to the ocean itself. He had not been drinking mead. He had been drinking the ebb tide. Deep in the abyss, Jörmungandr had felt it. A strange, suctioning force. A sudden, inexplicable drop in the pressure of his kingdom. The water around him had rushed away, pulled by a vacuum that defied the tides. The serpent had stirred in his sleep. his massive coils tightening in confusion. The ocean was his blanket, and someone was pulling the blanket away. He hissed, a sound that boiled the water in the trenches, but the sensation passed. The water returned. The balance was restored. But the serpent was now awake. He was alert. The disturbance had come from the land, from the east. Back in the hall, Utgard Loki smiled. It was a thin, predatory smile. He saw that the thunder god was shaken. He saw the doubt creeping into Thor's eyes. The giant knew that the most effective way to destroy a god was not to kill his body, but to break his spirit, to show him that his strength, the very core of his identity, was finite. "You drink well," the giant king lied, his voice echoing from the high rafters. "But not well enough for a god. Perhaps your thirst is small. Let us try something simpler. A game for children. A feat of strength that our youngest giants perform to stretch their muscles." Thor growled. The sound was low and dangerous, like a tectonic plate shifting. "I am not a child," he rumbled. "Give me a challenge worthy of the Aesir. I will wrestle your strongest warrior. I will break your pillars." "Patience," Utgard Loki soothed, waving a hand. "We do not brawl here. We play. Look there, on the floor. My gray cat. It has been sleeping by the hearth. All I ask is that you lift it. Pick it up from the ground. Lift it so that all four paws leave the stones. That is all." Thor looked. From the shadows beneath the high seat, a cat walked out. It was a large animal, certainly, perhaps the size of a lynx or a small wolf, but it was just a cat. Its fur was a dull, dusty gray. It moved with a slow, fluid grace, ignoring the gods and the giants alike. It sat in the center of the hall, licked a paw, and looked at Thor with eyes that were unnervingly blank. To Thor's eyes, it was an animal, but Thor was looking through a veil. The glamour, the magic of the giants, was overlaying reality. What stood in the hall was not a cat. It was a magical conduit, a hole in space, an aperture that connected the floor of the fortress directly to the bottom of the ocean. The shape of the cat was merely the interface. The reality was the serpent. Thor stepped forward. He felt insulted. To be asked to lift a house pet was beneath him, but he would do it. He would throw the beast through the roof to silence the giant's laughter. He walked up to the creature. He bent down. He placed his massive hands under the belly of the cat. "Prepare yourself, little one," Thor muttered. He surged upward. He expected the cat to fly into the air. He used the force required to lift a heavy sack of grain. Nothing happened. The cat did not move. It did not budge a millimeter. It felt rooted. Thor frowned. He applied more strength. He engaged his biceps, the muscles that could strangle bears. He pulled. The cat remained fixed to the floor, as if it were carved from the bedrock of the world. The animal looked up at him. Its expression bored. It arched its back slightly, a mockery of a stretch. Thor's confusion turned to anger. He planted his feet wide. He adjusted his grip, burying his fingers deep into the gray fur. But the fur felt strange. It was cold. It was hard. It felt less like hair and more like wire, or perhaps stone. Under the fur, there was no give of soft flesh. There was a solidity that felt infinite. Thor closed his eyes. He summoned the Asmegin, the god strength, the red rage, the power that fueled the storm. His aura flared, invisible to mortals but blinding to the giants. The air in the hall grew hot. The floor stones began to crack under his boots. He roared, a guttural scream of effort, and he heaved. Now, shift your perspective. Leave the hall. Dive. Dive instantly to the bottom of the Atlantic. Jörmungandr was resting. The disturbance of the water had settled. He was coiled around the earth, his tail securely in his mouth, the anchor of the world. Suddenly, he felt it. It was not a suction this time. It was a grip. Imagine a hand the size of a continent reaching down through the water. But it wasn't a physical hand. It was a band of force, a magical tractor beam that wrapped around his midsection. It was localized, sharp, and impossibly strong. It squeezed him, and then it pulled. The serpent was heavy. He weighed as much as the crust of the earth. He was not meant to be moved. Gravity was his friend. The ocean pressure was his blanket. But this force was fighting gravity. It was fighting the natural order. Jörmungandr felt himself being lifted. His massive bulk, miles of scaled muscle, was being dragged upward away from the seabed. He panicked. This was new. This was wrong. In the iron wood, he had been carried, but he was small then. Now, he was the world. To lift him was to lift the planet. He tightened his muscles. He engaged the core strength that held the continents together. He pulled back. He drove his weight down, slamming his belly against the silt, digging his claws, if he had them, into the magma beneath the crust. Above, in the hall, Thor felt the resistance. It was impossible. It felt as if the cat weighed more than a mountain. It weighed as much as the universe. His arms trembled. The veins in his neck bulged like ropes. His vision blurred. He was pulling against the foundation of reality. "Up!" Thor screamed. "Up, you wretched beast!" The cat arched its back higher. In the deep, the serpent's spine bent. He was being stretched. The pain was excruciating. His scales groaned, grinding against each other with the sound of rock slides. The magical connection, the cat interface, was focusing all of Thor's divine strength onto a single point of the serpent's body. It was a tug-of-war between the strongest force in the cosmos, Thor, and the heaviest object in the cosmos, Jörmungandr. The ocean reacted. As the serpent was pulled upward, the water was displaced. Massive voids opened up in the deep, collapsing instantly with the force of bombs. Tsunamis formed on the surface, racing toward the coasts of Norway and Scotland. The seabed cracked. Volcanic vents shattered, spewing black smoke into the water. Thor did not know he was causing an earthquake. He only knew that the cat was winning. And Thor does not lose. He adjusted his grip again. He dropped his center of gravity. He pulled with his legs, his back, his very soul. He decided that he would lift this cat, or he would die standing there. He gave one final, supreme effort. He went beyond his limits. He tapped into a reserve of power that frightened even Odin. In the deep, Jörmungandr felt the surge. The force pulling him was suddenly greater than the force of gravity holding him down. He couldn't hold it. He couldn't stay grounded. Slowly, agonizingly. One section of his body was ripped from the ocean floor. the silt billowed up in a cloud that covered miles. The rock of the seabed shattered. The serpent roared, a sound that was not heard in the air, but felt as a vibration in the teeth of every living thing in the ocean. He was airborne, or rather, waterborne. He was suspended. In the hall, the cat's paw lifted. Just one paw. The back right paw. It hovered an inch off the stone floor. Thor saw it. He had done it. He had broken the connection, but the effort was too much. His vision went black. His knees buckled. He dropped the cat. In the ocean, the serpent slammed back down. The impact was like a meteor strike. The shockwave killed schools of whales instantly. The seabed buckled, creating a new trench. Jörmungandr writhed in pain and fury, his coils thrashing, churning the ocean into a froth of mud and venom. He had been violated. He had been touched, grabbed, and manhandled by a ghost. He did not know who had done it. He only knew the taste of the magic. It tasted of giants, and it tasted of ozone, thunder. The connection snapped. The illusion held, but the physical link was broken. Thor stood up, gasping, wiping sweat from his eyes. He looked at the cat. The animal settled back onto all fours, smoothed its fur, and sat down again, looking completely unbothered. Utgard Loki was pale. He was gripping the arms of his throne so tightly that the wood had splintered. He looked at Thor with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. The giants on the benches were silent. They had stopped laughing. They knew what they had just seen. They had seen a god wrestle the apocalypse and win a partial victory. "You lifted the paw," Utgard Loki whispered. It was not a taunt. It was a confession of disbelief. "You actually lifted the paw." Thor was too exhausted to parse the tone. He felt only shame. "I failed," he rasped. "I could not lift a house cat. I am weak. My father was right. I am nothing." "Weak?" Utgard Loki stood up. He walked down to Thor. He looked at the god with a new respect, a wary respect, like a man looking at a bomb that hadn't gone off. "Thor, listen to me. We must end these games. You must leave. Tonight. You cannot stay here." "Why?" Thor demanded. "Because I am a failure?" "No," the giant king said softly. "Because you are too strong. You are dangerously strong. If I had known, by the void, if I had known what you were capable of, I would never have let you inside my walls." The giant leaned in close. The glamour flickered for a second, revealing the fear in his eyes. "That was no cat, Thor. Did you not feel the weight? Did you not feel the cold? That was the Midgard Serpent. That was Jörmungandr, the beast that encircles the world. We used magic to bind his image to the cat. We thought you couldn't move him. We thought he was immovable. But you arched his back. You stretched him until his head and tail nearly touched the sky. And when you lifted that one paw, do you know what you did?" Utgard Loki gestured to the world outside. "You shifted the earth. You altered the tides. You nearly pulled the monster out of the ocean. If you had lifted him entirely, the boundaries of the world would have snapped. The ocean would have poured into the sky. You would have ended us all." Thor stared at the cat. The gray fur shimmered. For a second, he saw it. He saw the scales. He saw the green and black armor of the abyss. He saw the yellow eyes of the serpent staring back at him, not with the boredom of a feline, but with the cold, eternal hatred of a nemesis. The cat hissed. It was the sound of steam escaping a vent. Thor realized then that his enemy was not a concept. It was real, and he had held it in his hands. He felt a phantom sensation on his palms, the rough, scraping texture of the scales. He remembered the feeling of the weight. It was the weight of destiny. "I lifted the serpent," Thor whispered. The shame evaporated. It was replaced by a cold fire, a realization. He could lift it. He was strong enough. The monster was big, yes, limitless perhaps, but Thor was stronger. Utgard Loki saw the change in Thor's eyes. He saw the determination. He realized he had made a terrible mistake. He had meant to humble the god. Instead, he had given him confidence. He had shown Thor that the impossible was within reach. "Go," the giant commanded, backing away. "Leave my hall. Take your friends. Do not return. Next time there will be no illusions. Next time I will defend my fortress with war." Thor turned to leave. He did not look back at the cat. He did not need to. He knew that the connection had been made. The serpent knew his touch now, the touch of the hammer wielder. As Thor walked out of the fortress, stepping back into the cold air of Jotunheim, he looked toward the ocean. He could not see it from there, but he could feel it. He knew the serpent was out there, nursing its bruised spine, coiled in the dark. "Wait," Thor said to the wind. "Just wait." The humiliation of the contest had vanished. Now there was only the obsession. Thor wanted a rematch. But this time he would not be tricked by a cat. He would not be fighting an illusion in a hall. He wanted the real thing. He wanted the scales, the slime, the venom, and the teeth. He wanted to feel that weight again, not to lift it, but to crush it. He needed a boat, and he needed bait. The journey to Utgard was over. The games were finished. Now began the hunt. Thor's mind turned to the only giant who possessed a cauldron big enough for the gods and a boat strong enough for the deep. Hymir, the fisherman. Deep in the ocean, Jörmungandr settled back into the silt. The pain in his back was a dull throb. He tasted the water. He tasted the lingering trace of the god's sweat that had traveled through the magic. He memorized it. The atmosphere is changing. The playfulness of the illusions is gone. Now we move to the gritty, wet reality of the fishing boat. We move to the gray waves and the smell of ox blood. We move to the Himiskvida. The sea calls to those who have touched its mysteries. Once you have felt the weight of the deep, even if only through the handle of a drinking horn or the fur of an illusionary cat, you are marked. Thor returned to Asgard, but his mind did not return with him. He sat in his hall, Bilskirnir, polishing the head of Mjolnir, his eyes unfocused. He was not listening to the songs of the skalds or the laughter of his children. He was listening to the memory of the ocean. He was remembering the sensation of the cat's paw leaving the ground. He knew now that the serpent was real, that it was waiting, and that it could be moved. But in the complex society of the Norse gods, one cannot simply go to war without a pretext. The Aesir needed a reason to visit the coast of the giants, and as fate would have it, they needed ale. The gods were planning a feast, a grand gathering to celebrate the turning of the seasons, but they lacked a cauldron large enough to brew mead for the entire pantheon. Tyr, the one-handed god of war, stepped forward with a suggestion. He spoke of his stepfather, the giant Hymir, a being as old as the rocks who dwelt at the edge of the celestial sea. Hymir, Tyr said, possessed a kettle, a cauldron so vast it was a mile deep. It was the only vessel in existence capable of satisfying the thirst of the gods. Thor seized this opportunity. He did not care about the ale. He did not care about the feast. He cared about the location. Hymir lived by the ocean. Hymir was a fisherman. Hymir had a boat. And so the journey began. Thor and Tyr traveled together, leaving the golden fields of Asgard for the rugged gray coastlines of Jotunheim. They arrived at Hymir's hall as the sun was setting, painting the sky in bruises of purple and red. The hall was a fortress of driftwood and whalebone, perched on a cliff that overlooked the heaving expanse of the North Atlantic. The wind here was not a breeze, it was a physical assault, stripping the heat from the skin and carrying the spray of the waves hundreds of feet into the air. Hymir was waiting. He was a giant of the old breed, craggy, sullen, his beard stiff with salt and frost. He looked at Thor, not with the hostility of a warrior, but with the weary wariness of a man who knows that a storm has just walked into his living room. The laws of hospitality bound him. He could not turn them away, but his eyes narrowed as he looked at the thunder god. He saw the hunger in Thor's stance. Not a hunger for food, but a hunger for violence. Dinner was served. The giants live on a scale that dwarfs humanity. 3 entire oxen were roasted on spits the size of tree trunks. The smell of charred meat and dripping fat filled the hall. Hymir ate with the slow, methodical pace of a creature that has all of eternity. But Thor ate with a frantic energy. He consumed 2 of the 3 oxen by himself. He cracked the bones to suck the marrow. He wiped the grease from his red beard and looked around for more. Hymir watched this display with growing horror. He was a rich giant, but even his larder had limits. "You have a hunger that will bankrupt me, guest," Hymir grumbled, his voice like grinding stones. "If you plan to stay another night, we cannot rely on my stores. We will have to go to the sea. We will have to row out and catch our sustenance." Thor smiled. It was a smile that showed too many teeth. "I agree," the god said. "I am fond of fishing. I will row for you, giant. But I will need bait." Hymir waved a hand dismissively toward the pasture behind the hall. "Go to my herd. Find a worm or a scrap of meat. Take what you need, if you are strong enough to catch it." The giant meant to mock him, implying he should dig for earthworms. But Thor stood up. He walked out of the hall and into the twilight pasture. The herd of Hymir was grazing there. These were not ordinary cattle. They were the Himinhyrjodr, the heaven bellowers. Massive, black-furred beasts with horns that spanned 6 feet, their breath steaming in the cold air. They were the prized possessions of the giant, creatures of immense vitality and power. Thor scanned the herd. He was not looking for the weak or the sick. He was looking for the king. He saw him. A bull of pitch black, standing apart from the others, pawing the frozen earth. Its muscles rippled under its hide like rolling stones. It was the perfect sacrifice. It was the only offering worthy of the adversary Thor intended to summon. Thor approached the bull. The beast lowered its head, snorting a warning, its eyes rolling with aggression. It charged. Thor did not draw a knife. He did not raise his hammer. He stepped inside the charge, grabbing the bull by its massive horns. He planted his feet. The impact would have shattered a stone wall, but Thor did not budge. He twisted. With a roar that rivaled the thunder, Thor wrenched the bull's head. There was a sickening crack of vertebrae, a tearing of tough skin and muscle. In one brutal, fluid motion, the god tore the head of the bull clean from its body. The massive carcass collapsed to the ground, twitching. Thor stood there, holding the severed head, blood dripping onto his boots. He looked at the dead eyes of the bull, then at the ocean. This was the bait. This was the invitation. He walked back to the shore, carrying the head as easily as a man carries an apple. Hymir was waiting by the boat, preparing the nets. When he saw Thor emerging from the mist, blood-soaked and carrying the prize of his herd, the giant's face went pale. He realized then that he was not taking a guest fishing. He was taking a catastrophe out onto the water. "You killed the prize bull," Hymir whispered. "I needed big bait," Thor replied simply. "For big fish." They launched the boat. It was a skiff, but in the world of giants, a skiff is the size of a Viking warship. It was built of dark, resinous wood, sealed with tar, heavy and broad-beamed to handle the rough swells of the outer ocean. They pushed it through the surf, the icy water biting at their legs, until it floated free. Thor took the oars. Usually, the giant Hymir rowed his own boat. He knew the rhythm of the sea, but Thor insisted. He sat on the bench, placed the massive wooden oars in the rowlocks, and began to pull. If you have ever seen a sculling race, you know the grace of it. This was not that. This was a display of raw, mechanical power. Every time Thor pulled, the wood of the oars groaned in protest. The blades bit into the water, creating whirlpools that spun away into the dark. The boat surged forward, its bow lifting out of the water, slamming down on the next wave. They were moving at an impossible speed. The wind whipped their hair back. The coastline of Jotunheim shrank rapidly until it was just a thin gray line, and then it vanished. They reached the fishing banks. This was where Hymir usually stopped. It was a place where the continental shelf began to drop, where the flatfish and the whales gathered. "Stop!" Hymir shouted over the wind. "Here! This is the place. I catch halibut here. I catch whales here. Drop the anchor." Thor did not stop rowing. He did not even look up. "Too shallow," he grunted. "The bait is too big for flatfish." He pulled harder. The boat shot past the banks. The color of the water changed. It went from the greenish gray of the coastal waters to a deep, bruised indigo. They were crossing the shelf. They were entering the pelagic zone. "Thor!" Hymir screamed. "Turn back! You go too far! Beyond this point! Beyond this point is the danger. The worm lies out here. It makes the water boil. It hates us." "I am counting on it," Thor said, and he rowed on. they entered the desolation. This is the part of the ocean that sailors fear most. It is the place where the map ends. The waves here were not choppy. They were massive, rolling hills of water that moved with a slow, terrifying grandeur. The sky seemed lower here, pressing down on them. The silence was absolute, broken only by the slap of the hull and the creak of the oars. The water turned black. Not dark blue, but black. The light of the sun seemed to be absorbed by it, never to return. Finally, miles from any known land, directly over the deepest trench in the Atlantic, Thor shipped the oars. The boat drifted, bobbing in the silence. The silence of the deep ocean is heavy. It presses against the ears. It is the silence of a graveyard that spans the world. Ymir sat in the stern, huddled in his cloak, trembling. He was a giant, a creature of chaos, but he knew his place in the food chain. He knew that they were floating on top of the apex predator. He watched as Thor stood up in the bow. Thor prepared his line. He did not use the giant's nets. He produced a line of his own, a cable reinforced with oxhide and iron wire. And the hook was a masterpiece of cruelty. It was a massive anchor, forged by the dwarves, barbed and sharp as a razor. Thor took the severed head of the bull, Himminhjordr. He impaled it onto the hook. He drove the iron through the skull, through the bone, ensuring it would hold. The blood of the bull washed over the iron, scenting the water. Thor looked down into the black water. He whispered a word. It was not a prayer. It was a summons. He cast the bait. The heavy head hit the water with a splash that echoed like a gunshot. It sank immediately. Thor played out the line, hand over hand, watching it disappear into the abyss. Down, down, past the depth where the light fades, past the depth where the whales dive, past the depth where the krakens wrestle. The line went slack. It had reached the bottom, or near enough to it. Thor sat down. He wrapped the line around his hand, his iron gloves creaking. He braced his feet against the gunwale of the boat. He waited. Ymir watched him. "You are mad," the giant hissed. "You are bringing doom upon us. Cut the line. Let us go back." Thor did not answer. He was a statue of concentration. He was extending his senses down through the line, feeling the currents, feeling the temperature. He was hunting. Below them, miles down in the crushing dark, the water tasted of blood. Jörmungandr woke. He had been drifting in the semi-sleep of the immortals, his body coiled around the earth, his tail securely in his mouth. But the scent of the oxblood was sharp. It cut through the salt. It was a scent of earth, of pasture, of life. It was an offering. The serpent uncoiled slightly. He moved his head. The movement displaced millions of gallons of water. A current rushed through the trench. He saw the bait. A small, fleshy object floating in the void, leaking delicious fluids. To the serpent, it looked like a snack, a morsel. But there was something else about it. A trap? The serpent was old and wise, but he was also arrogant. He was the world serpent. Nothing could hurt him. Nothing could hook him. He approached the bait. His massive jaws, lined with rows of teeth like obsidian daggers, opened. The bioluminescence of the deep reflected in his yellow eyes. He engulfed the bull's head. He clamped his jaws shut. And then he swallowed. The hook caught. It snagged in the soft palate of the roof of his mouth. It dug deep into the divine flesh of the monster. Jörmungandr reacted instantly. He thrashed. He jerked his head back, intending to snap the line or spit out the annoyance. Above, in the boat, the line went tight. Snap! It didn't break. It hummed. It vibrated with a note so low it made the timber of the boat shiver. Thor felt the yank. It was violent. It pulled his arm down, smashing his knuckles against the gunwale. "He has taken it," Thor said. His voice was calm, but his eyes were blazing with blue fire. "The worm has taken the bait." Thor pulled back. This was the moment of connection. The second time they had touched. The first time at Utgard, it had been through a filter of magic. This time, it was direct. Iron to flesh. God to beast. Jörmungandr felt the pull. It was the same pull. He recognized the signature of the strength. It was the lifter. It was the one who had humiliated him. The rage that exploded in the serpent's brain was hotter than the underwater volcanoes. He did not just pull back, he swam down. He drove his body toward the core of the earth, intending to drag the boat and the god down into the crushing dark. The boat groaned. Seams began to pop. Water started to leak in. Hymir screamed, clutching the sides of the vessel, his eyes wide with terror. "Cut it! Cut the line! We are sinking!" Thor ignored him. He was locked in a battle of physics. The force of the serpent pulling down was greater than the buoyancy of the boat. The bow was being pulled under. They were going to capsize. Thor realized the boat was the weak link. He could not fight from a floating platform that was breaking apart. He needed an anchor. He needed leverage. He stood up. He tightened his grip on the line. He summoned the Asmegan to its absolute limit. His belt of strength, Megingjord, glowed with a fierce light. His muscles swelled, tearing his tunic. He stomped his feet. He did not just plant them. He drove them through the boat. With a sound of splintering timber, Thor's legs punched through the hull of the skiff. The freezing ocean water rushed in around his thighs, but his feet kept going. They went down, past the keel, past the water, until they hit the solid bedrock of the ocean floor. It is an image that defies logic, but myth is the logic of the dream. The ocean was miles deep, yet Thor stood on the bottom, the water coming only to his waist, the broken boat resting around his hips like a wooden skirt. He had become a colossus. He had grounded himself in the earth to fight the sea. Now he had leverage. "Rise!" Thor roared. "Rise and face me!" He began to haul, hand over hand. He pulled the line. The muscles of his back bunched and coiled. He was reeling in the world. Below, Jörmungandr felt himself being dragged up. He fought. He whipped his tail, creating whirlpools. He bit at the line, but the iron wire held. He was being forced to surface. The pressure dropped. The light grew brighter. The surface of the ocean began to boil. It hissed and foamed. Bubbles the size of houses burst on the waves. The water turned a sickly, poisonous green. Hymir, cowering in the stern of the shattered boat, looked over the side. He saw a shape rising from the deep, a shape that went on forever. First came the snout, dripping with slime, scarred and ancient. Then the eyes, those terrible yellow vertical eyes. Then the head. Jörmungandr broke the surface. He rose like a pillar of doom. He towered over the boat, his head blocked out to the weak sun. Water cascaded off his scales like waterfalls. The smell hit them first. A stench of rotting fish, sulfur, and old, stagnant death. Thor looked up. He stopped pulling. He held the line in one hand, the serpent tethered to his will. With his other hand, he reached for his belt. He unhooked Mjolnir. The hammer, the crusher. Thor gripped the handle. The leather wrappings felt warm in his hand. He looked at the serpent. The serpent looked at him. There was a moment of silence, a pause in the storm, the stare of the abyss. Thor grinned. It was a grin of pure battle lust. He wound up his arm. He prepared to throw. He prepared to strike the blow that would end the threat forever. He prepared to save the world. But he had forgotten the third person in the boat. Hymir. The giant was paralyzed. He looked at the serpent, the child of Angrboda, the encircler of all things, and he saw the end of the universe. He saw Ragnarok. He knew that if Thor struck that blow, if the head of the serpent was crushed, the release of venom would poison the ocean for eternity. The death throes of the beast would shatter the tectonic plates. The world would die. Hymir's hand moved. It was a cowardly movement, a movement of panic, but perhaps also a movement of preservation. He drew his bait knife. It was a small, sharp blade used for cutting fish. Thor's arm was coming forward. The hammer was beginning its arc. Hymir leaned over the gunwale. He reached for the taut line. The knife touched the cord. The blade sliced through the tension. Snap. The line parted. Thor stumbled back, the sudden release of tension throwing him off balance. The hammer flew from his hand, flying wide, splashing harmlessly into the sea. The serpent fell back. The splash was a cataclysm. A wall of water rose up, obscuring the sky. Jörmungandr did not wait. He did not attack. He knew he had escaped execution by a second. He turned. He dove. He swam down faster than he had ever swum before, retreating into the safety of the dark, leaving a trail of blood and poison in his wake. He was gone. Thor stood there, waist deep in the ocean, the broken boat around him, the cut line in his hand. He stared at the spot where the monster had been. The rage that filled him was absolute. It was a cold, white silence. He turned to Hymir. The giant was huddled in the corner, clutching the knife, shivering. He looked up at Thor, expecting death. Thor did not speak. He did not shout. He simply looked at the giant who had saved the monster. The myth has different endings here. Some say Thor struck Hymir with his fist, killing him instantly. Some say he threw him overboard. Some say he simply left him there, a pathetic figure in a broken boat. But the result was the same. The catch was lost. The enemy had seen the hammer, and the hammer had missed. Thor waded back to the shore. He walked through the ocean floor, dragging the remains of the boat until he reached the beach. He stepped onto the land. He was soaked, smelling of ox blood and sea slime. He looked out at the horizon. The sea was calm again, but it was a lie. The war had begun. The bait had been taken. The hook had been set and then cut. But the wound remained. Jörmungandr would heal, but he would never forget. And Thor would never forgive. The fishing trip was over, but the twilight was coming. The next time they met, there would be no boat. There would be no line. There would only be the land, the sky, and the poison. The story moves now to the inevitable, to the winter that does not end, to the shaking of the world. We must prepare for the final confrontation. We must prepare for the venom. The ocean heals, but it does not forget. When the line snapped and the surface of the Atlantic closed over the retreating form of Jörmungandr, a silence fell upon the world that was heavier than any that had come before. It was the silence of a missed execution. The universe had held its breath, waiting for the blow that would shatter the skull of the apocalypse, and the blow had not fallen. Now, the breath was released, but it was a sigh of dread. The opportunity was lost. The monster had escaped back into the dark, carrying with it the knowledge of the god's face and the taste of his iron. Down in the crushing depths, the serpent did not immediately return to his sleep. He could not. The hook of Thor, that massive, barbed anchor, had torn through the soft meat of his palate. It had ripped scales and shattered teeth before the line was cut. The wound was deep. It was a jagged tear in the divine flesh of the world encircler, and unlike the scratches of krakens or the abrasion of rocks, this wound did not close quickly. It burned. It pulsed with a lingering electrical heat, the residue of the thunder god's aura. Jörmungandr coiled himself in the deepest trench, the Niflheim Deep, where the water is so cold it is almost ice. He thrashed in the dark, churning the silt, his massive body writhing in a paroxysm of pain and fury. He sought to soothe the burning in his mouth, but the salt of the ocean only sharpened the agony. For the first time in eons, the serpent felt vulnerable. He had been touched. He had been dragged. He had been hurt. And from this pain, something terrible began to leak. In Norse mythology, the venom of the serpent is called aether. It is not merely a biological toxin, like the venom of a viper or a cobra. It is a primordial substance. It is the liquid form of chaos. It is the substance from which the first giant, Ymir, was formed in the Ginnungagap. It is the anti-life. And now, dripping from the torn gums of the serpent, bleeding into the pristine currents of the ocean, the aether began to spread. It started slowly. A dark, oily plume rising from the trench. It moved with the deep currents, invisible to the eye, but fatal to the soul. Where the aether flowed, the sea died. Great schools of herring, millions strong, floated to the surface, their bellies white, their eyes clouded with a milky blindness. Whales beached themselves on the shores of Norway and Scotland, driven mad by the burning in the water, their songs turning into screams of distress. The coral reefs, the rainforests of the deep, turned gray and crumbled into dust. The ocean was being poisoned. The blood of the serpent was mixing with the water of the world. It was a slow ecological catastrophe that the humans of Midgard could not understand. They saw the dead fish. They saw the water turning a strange, sickly green in the moonlight. They smelled the sulfur on the wind. They sacrificed to Njord, the god of the sea, asking for mercy. But Njord could do nothing. The poison was not of his making. It was the bile of the abyss. Above the waves, in the halls of Asgard, The mood had shifted from anxiety to a grim fatalism. Thor had returned from the fishing trip. He did not boast of his catch. He did not tell the story with his usual roaring laughter. He walked into Bilskirnir, his great hall, and hung Mjolnir on the wall. He sat by the fire, staring into the flames, his face a mask of stone. He was haunted. He was haunted by the stare. In that brief moment, when the serpent's head had breached the surface, when the water cascaded off those mountain-sized scales, Thor had looked into the eyes of Jörmungandr, and Jörmungandr had looked into his. It was a moment of perfect, terrifying communication. There were no words, but there was an understanding. Thor saw a hatred that was older than the stars. He saw an intellect that was cold, alien, and vastly superior to the brute beasts he usually fought. He realized that this was not just a monster. This was his shadow. This was the thing he was born to kill, and the thing that was born to kill him. The stare had forged a psychic link. Thor could feel the serpent now. Even miles away, high in the realm of the gods, he could feel the phantom pain in his own jaw, mirroring the wound he had inflicted. He could feel the cold dampness in his bones. When he slept, he dreamt of drowning. He dreamt of being wrapped in coils of wet, black iron. He dreamt of the Aether burning his eyes. The other gods sensed the change in their champion. Odin, the All-Father, watched from Hlidskjalf. He saw the Aether spreading in the ocean. He saw the darkness gathering in the mind of his son. He knew that the timeline had accelerated. The fishing trip had not been a failure. It had been a catalyst. It had woken the enemy. The binding of the serpent, the tail in the mouth, was no longer a passive act of stability. It was now an active, straining effort. The serpent was holding the world together not out of instinct, but out of spite, waiting for the moment to let go and shatter the earth. Time moved differently now. The seasons seemed to blur. The summers became shorter, the sun pale and watery. The winters became longer, the frost biting deeper into the ground. The Fimbulwinter, the great winter, was approaching. It is described in the Eddas as 3 winters without a summer, a time when the sun loses its warmth and the earth loses its fertility. But before the snow fell, there was the decay. In Jotunheim, the giants were stirring. They heard the screams of the serpent echoing through the bedrock. They knew their champion was awake. They began to forge weapons. They began to build the ship Naglfar. This ship is one of the most gruesome images in mythology. It is made not of wood, but of the fingernails and toenails of dead men. For centuries, the nails of the unhallowed dead had been collecting, and now the ship was nearing completion. The giants watched the ocean, waiting for the tide that would lift the vessel of doom. Back in the deep, Jörmungandr had stopped thrashing. The pain had settled into a dull, throbbing ache that fueled his resolve. He began to test the boundaries again. He pushed against the continental shelves. He flexed his coils. In Midgard, the ground shook. Earthquakes toppled the stone circles of the ancients. Cracks appeared in the walls of fortresses. The world girdle was tightening. The serpent was squeezing the planet, testing its structural integrity. He was also listening. He listened to the heartbeat of the world. He heard the fear in the prayers of men. He heard the arguments of the gods. And he heard the footsteps of the wolf, Fenrir, pacing in his chains on the island of Lyngvi. The siblings were communicating. The wolf howled, and the vibration traveled through the earth to the ocean. The serpent hissed, and the sound traveled through the water to the island. They were coordinating. The family reunion was being planned. Jörmungandr realized that to defeat Thor, he needed to change his tactics. He could not just be a wrestler. He had to be a weapon. He focused on his venom sacs. He concentrated his biological energy on the production of eerie. He turned his body into a living chemical factory. He began to breathe the poison into the air bubbles that rose to the surface. The mist that hung over the ocean became toxic. Birds flying over the water dropped dead from the sky. Sailors who breathed the sea air coughed up blood and died of a wasting sickness. The serpent was weaponizing the atmosphere. He was preparing the battlefield. He knew that when the final day came, he would not fight Thor in the water. He would fight him on the land. He would crawl out of the abyss. He would bring the ocean with him. He would turn the field of battle into a swamp of venom and mud. Thor, too, was preparing. He began to train. But how does one train to fight the ocean? He did not practice with his hammer. He practiced his breathing. He stood on the highest peaks of Asgard, inhaling the thin, cold air, holding it in his lungs for hours. He knew that in the final battle the air would be poison. He was training his body to survive in a toxic environment. He was hardening his lungs against the Aether. The tragedy of this period, the twilight years, is the isolation of the protagonists. Thor was alone in his preparation. Jörmungandr was alone in his pain. They were two poles of a magnet, drawn inexorably together, yet separated by the barrier of the worlds. The tension was unbearable. It was a psychological horror story played out on a cosmic scale. And then, the first snowflake fell. It did not fall in the winter months. It fell in the height of summer. It landed on the green grass of a meadow in Midgard. It did not melt. Then another fell, and another. The sky turned a bruised purple. The sun, which had been weak for years, seemed to flicker like a dying candle. The wolves, Skoll and Hati, who chased the sun and moon, picked up their pace. They smelled the weakness of the celestial bodies. In the ocean, Jörmungandr felt the temperature drop. The surface of the sea began to freeze. Great sheets of ice formed, locking the waves in place. But the serpent did not mind the ice. He liked it. The ice was a bridge. It was a highway that would allow the giants to cross the ocean. He unclamped his jaw. For the first time in eons, the world serpent released his tail. Click! The sound of the release was softer than the sound of the binding, but its implications were far more terrifying. The circuit was broken. The tension was gone. The continents, released from the constricting grip of the snake, groaned. They shifted. Mountains crumbled. The oceans, no longer held back by the dam of the serpent's body, began to rise. Jörmungandr uncoiled. He stretched his body out, a line of darkness miles long. He began to swim toward the surface. He swam toward the land. He swam toward the field of Vigridr. He was not swimming to eat. He was not swimming to explore. He was swimming to die and to take the world with him. Thor stood on the walls of Asgard. He felt the shift. He felt the release of the tail. He looked at his hands. The iron gloves were trembling, not from fear, but from anticipation. "He is coming," Thor whispered. He turned to his father. He turned to the other gods. They were all looking at him. They knew. The time of myths and stories was over. The time of history was ending. The time of the end was beginning. Heimdall, the Watcher, ran to the edge of the Bifrost. He lifted the Gjallarhorn. He took a deep breath, the breath that would end the age of silence. The stare of the abyss was over. The abyss was now rising to meet them. The ocean heaved. The head of the serpent broke the ice. He did not stop rising. He crawled onto the shore. He dragged his massive, slime-covered bulk onto the frozen earth of Midgard. He flattened forests with his belly. He crushed cities with his weight. He spewed venom into the sky, turning the clouds black. He raised his head. He looked toward Asgard. He let out a roar that shattered the glaciers. "Thor," the roar seemed to say, "I am here." This is the moment before the clash. The board is cleared. The pieces are moving. The king of the sea has entered the battlefield of the land. The god of the sky is descending to meet him. The wind is not just moving air anymore. It is a razor. It carries the dust of crumbled mountains and the ash of burned forests. The sun has been swallowed. The moon is a memory. We have arrived at the end of the road, the Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods. The prophecy that was whispered in the dawn of time, the shadow that was cast in the iron wood, the tension that was pulled taut in the deep ocean, all of it snaps now. For 3 years, the Fimbulwinter has raged. It is a winter of the soul as much as the body. Brother has fought brother. The bonds of kinship, which held the Norse society together, have shattered like brittle ice. The world is gray, cold, and dying. But the death of the world is not a quiet fading away. It is a violent convulsion. From the east, the ship Naglfar has set sail. Its hull, white and jagged with the nails of the unhallowed dead, cuts through the waves that are no longer waves, but tsunamis of black sludge. The giant Hrym stands at the helm. Loki, freed from his bonds, stands at the prow, his eyes burning with a madness that has fermented for eons. The fire giants of Muspelheim are cracking the sky, riding over the Bifrost Bridge until it shatters behind them in a shower of sparks. But amidst this cacophony of war, amidst the howling of the great wolf Fenrir, who spans the sky from earth to heaven, there is a specific, focused horror unfolding on the coastline. The ocean is heaving. It is vomiting up its king. Jörmungandr has arrived. He does not swim gracefully anymore. He crawls. This is an image of profound wrongness, a creature of the deep, a creature designed for the weightless dark, dragging itself onto the land. He forces his massive bulk onto the shore of Midgard. His scales scrape against the bedrock, grinding granite into sand. He is so heavy that the land sinks beneath him, turning the coastline into a swamp. He is Jörmungandr, the great monster in every sense. As he moves toward the plain of Vigridr, the designated battlefield, he brings the atmosphere of the abyss with him. The Voluspa tells us he blows poison. This is not a metaphor. He exhales. Great clouds of aether, the primordial venom, roll out of his jaws. It is a mustard yellow mist that clings to the ground. Where it touches the earth, the grass withers instantly to black slime. Where it touches the stone, the rock hisses and dissolves. He sprays it into the sky, and the few remaining stars are blotted out. He is poisoning the very air that the gods need to breathe. Thor stands on the plain. He is waiting. He is not looking at Fenrir. He leaves the wolf to his father, Odin. He is not looking at Garm, the hound of Hel. He leaves that to Tyr. He is looking only at the mist. He sees the yellow cloud rolling toward him. He smells the familiar stench of the ox blood and rotting sea flesh. He feels the phantom pain in his jaw, the connection to the hook. Thor is dressed for war. He wears the belt of strength, Megingjord, buckled tight. He wears the iron gloves, Jarngreipr. He grips Mjolnir. But he does not look like the boisterous adventurer of the early myths. His red beard is matted with frost. His eyes are tired. He knows that this is not a fight he walks away from. He knows, deep in his divine blood, that he is a Fae, a man fated to die. The serpent emerges from the mist. He rears up. He is miles high. He looks down at the tiny figure of the god. In the chaotic noise of the battlefield, the clashing of swords, the screams of the Einherjar, the roaring of fire, these two create a bubble of silence. It is the silence of the grudge. Jörmungandr hisses. It is a sound like a steam vent opening in the earth. He remembers everything. He remembers the grip in the iron wood. He remembers the humiliation of the cat. He remembers the hook in the mouth. He does not see a god. He sees his tormentor. He sees the reason for his exile. Thor does not speak. There are no quips today, no boasts. He simply begins to walk. He walks into the poison mist. The duel begins. It is a clash of elemental opposites. Solid versus liquid. Order versus chaos. Hammer versus venom. The serpent strikes first. He lunges with the speed of a viper, his head a battering ram of scales and bone. Thor dodges. He steps aside with a speed that belies his size, the wind of the passing monster knocking him off balance. He swings Mjolnir. The hammer connects. Crack. The sound is louder than the breaking of the Bifrost. Mjolnir strikes the side of the serpent's head. Scales the size of shields shatter and rain down like shrapnel. Black blood sprays into the air. Jörmungandr screams, a high, keening wail that shatters glass miles away. He recoils. He whips his tail around, trying to sweep the god from his feet. Thor jumps. He leaps over the mountain of muscle that sweeps beneath him. He lands and strikes again. He hits the ribs. The sound of cracking bone echoes like thunder. But the serpent is vast. Breaking a rib does not stop him. It only angers him. He coils. He tries to wrap around Thor, to recreate the crushing pressure of the deep. He seeks to squeeze the life out of the god. Thor fights the coils. He pushes back with his arms, his legs, his back. He is the lifter. He lifted the cat. He can hold back the walls of flesh. He roars, expanding his chest, summoning the lightning. Bolts of blue fire arc from his body, scorching the serpent's hide. Jörmungandr realizes he cannot crush the god, so he uses his ultimate weapon. He opens his mouth. He is directly above Thor. He vomits the Eitr. It is a waterfall of venom, a deluge of acid and hate. Thor raises his arm. He takes the brunt of the stream on his shield and his iron glove. The shield dissolves. The iron hisses and pits. The fumes surround him. He holds his breath. He knows that to breathe is to die. His eyes burn. His skin blisters. The heat is unbearable. He is fighting in a chemical fog. He cannot see the enemy. He can only feel the movement of the air. He swings blindly. Mjolnir finds purchase. It strikes the jaw. It strikes the neck. The serpent is weakening. The sheer trauma of the blows from the heavy iron hammer is turning his brain to mush, but he keeps spewing the venom. He is flooding the battlefield. He intends to drown the god in poison. Thor knows he has only moments left. His lungs are screaming for air. His heart is hammering against his ribs. He needs to end it. He crouches. He gathers every ounce of strength he possesses. He channels the memories of his life, the sunlight of Asgard, the hair of Sif, the laughter of his children, the prayers of the humans he protected. He concentrates all of it into his right arm. He leaps. He flies through the venom mist, a missile of red hair and iron. Jörmungandr sees him coming. The serpent opens his jaws to bite, to swallow the god whole. Thor throws the hammer. It is a point-blank shot. Mjolnir flies into the open mouth of the beast. It smashes into the roof of the mouth, into the brain pan, into the very seat of the serpent's consciousness. The impact is absolute. The back of the serpent's head explodes. Jörmungandr crashes to the earth. The ground shudders. The impact flattens the hills of Vigridr. The massive body twitches once, twice, thumping against the soil, and then stillness. The yellow eyes go dark. The world serpent is dead. Thor lands. He staggers. He retrieves his hammer from the ruin of the monster's skull. He stands over the corpse of his enemy. He has done it. He has fulfilled the oath. He has protected the world. He turns away. He intends to go to Odin. He intends to help his father fight the wolf. He takes a step. 1. He feels a strange sensation in his chest, a tightness, a heat. He takes another step. 2. His vision blurs. The gray world turns to black at the edges. He coughs. It is a wet, hacking cough. He wipes his mouth. His glove comes away black. It is the ether. He breathed it in. During the exertion of the final blow, he had gasped. He had inhaled the mist. The poison is not in his stomach. It is in his blood. It is in his heart. 3. His legs feel like lead. The hammer, which he has carried for eons, which was light as a feather to him, suddenly drags his arm down. It is heavy, unbearably heavy. He stumbles. He catches himself. He is the god of strength. He does not fall, not yet. 5. He hears a sound. Is it the wolf? Is it the battle? No. It is the sound of the sea, the sound of the waves crashing on the shore, the serpent's home calling to him. 6. The pain is gone. Now there is only cold. The same cold he felt when he touched the cat in Utgard. The cold of the grave. 7. He thinks of Magni. He thinks of Modi. He hopes they are strong. He hopes they will find the hammer. His knees buckle. He falls to the earth of Midgard, the earth he loved, The earth he defended. He smells the grass, burned and poisoned as it is. It smells like home. 9. Thor falls forward. His face hits the dirt. The hammer slips from his fingers and lies beside his hand. He breathes out one last time. A final rumble of thunder, soft and distant, rolling away over the horizon. And then, the Thunderer is dead. The Guardian has fallen. The battle rages on, but the heart of the defense is broken. Odin falls to the wolf. Tyr falls to the hound. Freyr falls to the fire giant. And then Surtur, the lord of Muspelheim, raises his flaming sword. He strikes the earth. The world burns. The fire consumes the poison, the bodies, the forests, and the halls. The ocean rises, released from the serpent's weight, and swallows the burning land. The world sinks into the sea. Darkness. Silence. The script could end here. It would be a tragedy. But Norse mythology is not linear. It is cyclical. The end is never truly the end. Wait in the darkness. Listen. Do you hear it? The sound of water lapping against a shore. The fire dies down. The smoke clears. The sun, or perhaps a daughter of the sun, rises in the east. The earth rises from the sea a second time. It is green. It is fresh. The poison has been washed away by the fire and the flood. On the plains of Idavol, where Asgard once stood, the grass is tall and sweet. The eagles fly, the waterfalls tumble, and walking through the grass, 2 young figures appear. They are not old and scarred. They are young and strong. Magni and Modi, the sons of Thor. They are the survivors. They have weathered the fire. They walk through the ruins of the old world, looking for something. And they find it. Lying in the grass, untouched by the flames, ancient and heavy. Mjolnir, the hammer of their father. It is silent now. The lightning has faded. But the iron is still there. Magni reaches down. He picks it up. He does not need the belt. He does not need the gloves. He has his father's strength, purified. He lifts the weapon. He does not lift it to fight giants. The giants are gone. He lifts it to hallow, to bless, to build. The serpent is gone. The poison is gone. The fear is gone. But the memory remains. The scar on the world remains. The ocean is still deep, and the mountains are still high. And in the sound of the thunder, in the crash of the waves, we remember them. We remember the staring match across the abyss. We remember the hook and the bait. We remember the 9 steps. The monster defined the hero, and the hero defined the monster. They were the balance of the world. Now, the balance is ours to keep. Thank you for listening to Hearths of Myths. We have walked the path of the serpent from the iron wood to the twilight. We have seen the world encircle and the world break. If you found peace in this story of the end, if you felt the chill of the deep ocean and the warmth of the final fire, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The storm has passed. The water is calm. Sleep well.